Hey guys, how you doing? It's Joe here again from Impala Search, and I'm excited to be hosting yet another episode in our Impala Invites webinar series in Sweden. For those of you that don't know, this series aims solely at HR and talent acquisition specialists to give them valuable insight and advice on how to boost their careers. We've had some amazing guest speakers so far, and the podcast can be found on our Impala Insights page on our website and will soon be launched on Spotify. This week, I'm delighted to be inviting Julia Ferntoft, talent acquisition partner at Anyfin. And today we'll be discussing a really interesting topic of how to learn to maneuver in an environment which is completely new with a focus on fintechs. First of all, though, I'll let Julia introduce herself. Over to you, Julia.
Hey everyone. As said, I'm Julia, and I am the talent acquisition partner at Anyfin. And at Anyfin, I basically started out only doing tech recruitment, and my role is kind of turned into becoming so much more than only doing that during the past year that I've been at Anyfin. And for those of you who don't really know Anyfin from before, we are a FinTech startup here in Stockholm. We're a fairly young company in the sense that we were founded in 2017.
Yeah.
And we're currently very fast growing. And we are a very mission-driven company. And our mission is to help people to a better financial health, basically. And just to give you a brief background of kind of the journey that we've done is that in the past year, we actually doubled in size. We went from basically 40 to 80 people.
Which is quite impressive.
Yeah. We actually also just yesterday actually launched in Germany. And we've also launched several new products and basically gone from like a one product company to a several product company.
See, so that's hot off the press there, Julia, at the peak, which is pretty cool. But no, thank you for obviously taking the time today. Anyfin, really cool company. And I suppose one of Sweden's fastest growing at the moment, I believe, aren't they?
Yeah, definitely one of them.
Which is cool. But I think today, obviously, we're focusing on, I suppose, your journey. And like you say, you've recently joined Anyfin. Your role isn't just recruitment, although it was meant to be. And I think the first thing I'd love to cover is, I suppose, learning to maneuver an environment which is entirely new. So what did you actually mean by that?
Yeah, so I mean, looking at the background where I'm coming from, I'm still fairly junior in the sense that I've been working a year as a consultant in tech recruitment first, and then ended up at Anyfin. And to me, it was entirely new to go in-house, working in-house instead of being a consultant. And it has posed a lot of challenges, I would say. First of all, getting used to that people are actually applying to you instead of having to always go away and looking for others.
Yeah.
And kind of how to maneuver getting a lot of applications and still having a good candidate experience. Setting kind of standards for that. And I think also understanding the company, since being in a startup has been a new world for me, and understanding that, it did take a bit of time in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I think that what I did to kind of handle this was to make sure to just ask everyone I could. About like understanding the company, like, okay, why are we doing this? What is actually going on? And how is the engineering space working at Anyfin? How did we do recruitment before I ended up here?
I think that's a great tip for like anybody moving into a new role themselves, is just to ask. I think people generally get scared to ask at the start, don't they? Because you want to come across like you know everything. But you're not going to know everything at the start. You touched on a few key things there, I think, Julie. You mentioned obviously that the shift from going agency into internal, and I suppose people applying to you. So what advice would you give somebody looking to make them that shift themselves? Sorry, like what tip would you give them in terms of how different the change is, or how to pick it up a lot quicker?
I think that one thing is to understand the shift that you're still, of course, selling the company and making people want to work there, but
Hopefully.
it's a lot less sales and a lot more focus on kind of finding all the parts that just does not make it work. And it is also different when you talk to people that have been applying to you, because they are so eager, and it's easy to, in the beginning, or at least it was for me, to be like, yeah, everyone wants to work here. This person is great. This person is great. And then you realize, no, like these are people that are super into us and super interested, and I don't have to do that part of the job. But then a lot of the job just becomes, instead of, I wouldn't say crushing people's dreams, but being that person saying that, no, you can't do this.
Yeah.
And I think that was a challenge in the beginning, but it's something that you have to cope with. And
I completely get that as well, because people are approaching you being like, I love Anyfin, I want to work for this company. And you've then got to actually sift through that passion, I suppose, and actually look for the skill set. Whereas on the flip side, it's more finding that skill set, then also presenting a role. So it's two ways rather than, I suppose, the one-way traffic coming in, which is, like you said, quite interesting. And I bet it's hard at first to differentiate between good candidates and better candidates based on their passion. But I think that's a real good tip you said there. In terms of understanding the company, you mentioned asking questions. And I know that stakeholders, some are, I suppose, more warm than others, and some are easier to approach than others. So when you've gone from agency to then internal and you've got stakeholders to manage, what tips and advice would you give people in that position that you were in?
Yeah, I think coming in with not a lot of experience, in the sense that I did, at first I kind of felt like I didn't have too much to offer. But then after a while, you realize that, I actually do have experience from some things, and I am the one in the company that knows how to do this. So I think just daring to kind of take up that space, and show that you're interested and that you want to be part of things, I think has been crucial to me. And also daring to talk to the different internal stakeholders, and also dare to request them to kind of answer all the questions that you have.
Yeah, I think, like you say, if you've got those great internal relationships, the process runs a lot smoother. And I think a big thing is, like you say, getting them to answer every question that you ask. I think you need to let them know how important those questions are, because one minor detail can definitely differentiate, well, a good candidate being interested or not interested. So I think you make a really good point there, to be fair, Julia. What was it like for yourself then working with that technical team? Because I suppose that's also a completely different beast in itself, isn't it? From going from an agency where you understand technologies, but not necessarily as in depth as somebody in the technical team. So how did you find that transition?
Yeah, I actually found that amazing. It has given me so much help, and the engineers that we have been and are still so helpful. So I think that, it really does, and I think that has really helped me understand how we work, and also whenever it comes to technical questions that I didn't know the answers to before, they're also always willing to help and willing to just reach out a helping hand. So I think that is actually a huge plus of going in-house, to having that support as well from the technical team.
Yeah, I suppose it's like having that insider knowledge, isn't it? The knowledge we don't have access to on the other side of the fence. You've got arguably too much of it on this side of the fence. It probably blows your mind with all the stuff that you learn.
Yeah.
I think one cool thing we spoke about actually when we obviously I was introduced myself. We're looking to do the podcast was your relationship with the CTO and how helpful Sven's been. And I think that's something that I think would be great to touch on because people in your position that report into that CTO or that board level probably haven't been in that scenario before. So just talk us through that relationship and I suppose how it's progressed from the start to now.
Yeah. So Sven, who's our CTO, he's been really, really helpful, and I'm reporting to him.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I needed a lot of help from him and a lot of guidance and support. And he always provided that. And
Going to get brownie points from Sven there, Julia.
Yeah, exactly. Go Sven. No, but I mean, the interesting thing I think is to see that throughout this year, I have grown quite a bit, and what I need his help in is now varying, and I'm much more confident in the work that I do, and I think that now we are in a position where we can kind of more discuss what to be done and how we think that things should shift. But there are still things where I feel like I am now on a different path and on a different level of what I need to learn. And we've come to a place where I think that I need somebody else as well that can kind of help me to talk about questions when it comes to recruitment and when it comes to more HR questions, etc. So
it's that shift away from the actual technical side now then more to the process side, would you say?
Exactly like that. And one of the things that I have been doing to kind of get that support as well, since we don't have anyone in the company currently that can actually kind of give that support, is that I've been talking to our investors actually and finding help from them.
I think that's really cool because a lot of people, I suppose, overlook the investors, not in the way that they disregard them, but you don't see them potentially as people that can offer advice. You see them as those, wow, these are like really scary big investors that are giving us, I suppose, this backing, but can we approach them? And I think it's really cool that you did. So what kind of questions are you, I suppose, asking the investors, or what relationship do you have with them at the moment?
Yeah, so we do monthly catch-ups, and then they're all also, of course, like available if I need them. But it's a lot about like just having somebody else that is in your field where you can kind of get your ideas out and having somebody to discuss them with. So we discuss everything from how to think about strategy. One of the things that I am working on myself is understanding how to become more data-driven in a better way in recruitment. It's been really helpful in that sense to have that support.
What do you mean? And I suppose you don't need to go into masses of detail here, actually, Julie, but being more data-driven, why is that so important, do you think, or what do you mean by that?
So I think that data is at the basis of understanding what you're doing well and what you're doing less good,
not so well.
Not so well. And because without data, you're kind of moving around blind. I think it's really important to understand who is applying to us, how many people do we need applying to us for one recruitment. And also to be able to see how happy are people with this, understanding where we can.
It's always the big test, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is, and like understanding, what we can do better to give a better experience for the people applying to us, but also how we can scale recruitment, because as I said in the beginning, we've doubled in size, and the goal is to continue on that journey. And to be able to do that, we we really need to be able to scale our hiring in a good way.
Well, no pressure on you there, Julia. I think you've got to come across to be quite innovative, which is good. I think going on to hiring, then it actually makes us progress quite nicely on to I suppose the next section, which is I suppose learning that new market and new roles. And like you say, quickly, you're in a hyper growth company at the moment, or a business that wants to be hyper growth, and you've learned a new market. You've obviously done something right to double the team. So hats off there, but. How different, I suppose, is FinTech, I suppose, to finance? Because a lot of people say, oh, I've come from finance, I can work in a FinTech, but what is the main differences?
I'd say, I think it's interesting, just that question, because as you say, it's easy to think that just because you're coming from finance, it's the same and you'd like be great for the two of them. I think that startup culture really beats being, say, in one of the really big banks.
Being really
it's corporate. Of course, if it's of course a plus if you understand finance, if you understand the factors and everything that is going on behind the scenes when it comes to finance. But when it comes to actually fitting in a company that are working with really new things when it comes to FinTech and being the environment of doing entirely new things, I think it's much more important to have the startup mindset and understanding that we are moving very fast. Being open to a lot of new ideas, and that kind of culture fit will be much more important than the actual knowledge that you have.
Yeah, I think that's a real, I suppose, solid piece of advice, especially for a growing company. At the start, when the team's obviously much smaller, there's a lot more cross collaboration, isn't there? And like you said, being in that startup environment, I suppose agile's the word thrown around quite a lot at the moment, isn't it? Yes. But I think, what do you think, I suppose, Anyfin means by agile? Is it just a word, or is it the way that you actually process things day to day?
So it is the way that we work and how we process things day to day as well. I mean, in the environment and the world that we're living in now, you kind of need to be agile. You need to have that mindset to be able to grow. And then there are a lot of different ways that companies do agile, but I think it's super important.
Yeah, I think, like you say, that different every day is different, isn't it? And that makes you learn a lot quicker. And you've obviously done exceptional at doing that. In terms of you learning the new market within not necessarily tech, but FinTech specifically, what advice would you give somebody that's looking at this similar kind of transition to you to actually pick up the market a little bit quicker?
I think I think everything goes back into asking questions. But I think that being curious about what is going on in the market is important. One thing that we do a lot within Anyfin, and that I would advise anyone who wants to kind of go into FinTech to do, is to we share a lot of the information that is going on. If somebody finds an interesting article, we'll share it with everyone in the company to kind of keep everyone up to date. Because to us, it's really important that everyone understands the business and everyone understands kind of the environment that we're in. We believe that that will make us do much better products. So I think that is important to understand the market that you're in, and to just read about it and making sure that you have an interest in it, or if you don't from before, then grow an interest in it.
Yeah, I think that's a real good point, especially for somebody looking to make that shift. And I think, obviously, Anyfin's doing exceptionally well. You've had a real positive career, but if we're being, I suppose, realistic as well, whenever you're in any recruitment role or any internal HR role, there's a lot of challenges which come with these. So the challenges that you're facing right now, what would you say the main challenges are at the moment?
Yeah, I think as you say, there are so many challenges.
It's what makes it exciting, isn't it?
It is. It really is. And I mean, it's of course like everywhere finding the best talent.
Yeah.
And when it comes to like finding the best talent, and looking at us as a company, we are doing a lot of international hiring.
Yeah.
And that is something that I really love doing personally. I'm a person who enjoy different cultures, and I believe that it makes for a much more interesting work environment.
Yeah.
But hiring international candidates is definitely a challenge when it comes to recruitment, because you'll have cultural differences. You need to make sure that you actually spend time on people that are willing to move, and kind of understanding who is actually willing to move and who's not.
Yeah. I think if you had a winning formula for that, Julia, everyone would be biting your hand off, in all honesty.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's one of the things. And then I think the other part is also understanding new roles that you've never heard about before or never done before. So this is definitely from my own perspective.
Yeah, I think people don't necessarily understand that until they're in the position and they're like, well, I've worked in tech recruitment. I know most roles within technology, although they're not a specialist in every role because nobody can be. But when you then go into FinTech, there's so many roles that I suppose I'd never even heard of before I started working with a couple of challenger banks or FinTechs. You're like, what actually is this?
Yeah.
So with you, what advice would you give to people that are, I suppose, trying to learn these new roles, but not only that, trying to fill these new roles while learning what they actually are?
Yeah, I think that that is a journey in itself.
Yeah.
And I think that here it's really important to make sure that you're super close to your stakeholders, understanding the manager that you are hiring for, understanding exactly what it is that they need, and doing a thorough like before you post the ad or before you put the role out, making sure that you really understand the role.
Yeah.
And it does happen for us that we are, as being a startup, that we believe that we're looking for something, and then after talking to a few people, we realize that no, this is actually not what we're
completely
looking for.
Different.
This is something, something entirely different. So I think it's important to have that really close dialogue with the hiring managers, and really talking about every person that we reject that have come quite far in the process, to have a discussion about, okay, why are we not taking this person forward?
Yeah.
What is it that we can do better for the next interviews, and just having that conversation. I think
that
100%. Yeah, and I think that also makes us giving a better candidate experience as well, because that means that we can really give a clear answer to the candidate on why we did not move forward with them. And I think that's really important.
Definitely. I think, but building on that, I'm actually going to, so Daniel, who I did the podcast with last week, he touched on that actually, Julian. He was like, you need to ask for feedback, but for both sides. So if there's candidates that have come so far in the process and I suppose not right now, they still actually might be right in the future. And on the other side, there's probably candidates that you make offers to that don't accept. I mean, touch wood, hopefully not. But it's, I suppose, understanding why they didn't accept as well, so you can make those changes going forward. So I think that's a real great point you've just touched on there, actually, Julian. Actually builds on something that one of the guys said last week. So at least it's a common theme anyway. We're on the right lines, I think, Julie, which is good.
Yes.
You've touched on there that I suppose the realities of working in a fast-growing company, that one role can be something one day, and then 2 days later, actually, we need to look at something completely different, or we're changing this role in a way to make it fit. So what would you say that the wider challenges, so away from FinTech, of just working in a fast-growing business that are doubling continually in size, what are the main challenges?
Yeah, so I think that one of the challenges is actually to get used to the fast pace. Yeah. Coming from different companies, it's difficult to understand how fast it actually moves.
Yeah.
And also one of the things that I found difficult in the beginning is to know where to go for what.
Okay.
Understanding who is the stakeholder for this,
Yeah.
who knows this, who do I need to talk to kind of get where I want to get, or like go to where I want to
Yeah, no,
go.
that makes sense.
And I think one really important part is learning by doing. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I am doing every day, I'm doing a lot of things that I've never done before.
Yeah.
And as a company, that's what we're doing as well. We're just trying our way forward and are doing new things that nobody's done before. And I think that requires a lot from the people working here. You need to be curious about learning, and there aren't always people to ask. You need to find the answers yourself,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
I think that's a real good point. Like learning by doing, I suppose making mistakes with that as well. Like a lot of people seem to be afraid of making mistakes, but you do learn from them. So it's don't be afraid to push and then make a mistake and then just rectify that mistake going forward. I think is a real important thing as well.
I
Um,
really do as well.
I think with a common theme of what you said, and it goes back to something that you said at the start, Julia, that you were hired to do one thing and now your role's developed into something that's a lot more.
Yeah.
So I imagine that you have a lot less time than you thought you would do at the start, which again, it isn't a bad thing at all. It's quite exciting. So how do you manage your time, and how do you manage your time with demanding stakeholders or hiring managers?
Yeah. I think that has been a challenge to me in the
Yeah.
beginning. And I guess it continues to be a challenge as well. Just finding the time between the things that just take a few seconds to do and the bigger picture that you also
Mm-hmm.
kind of need to keep track of. And I'm a list person. So I
Okay.
do, I write tons of lists
Yeah.
to be able to not have everything in my head and to kind of be able to prioritize as well. But I think it's also important to talk to the different stakeholders and ask what is super important now and
Yeah.
what can wait until tomorrow, and really be honest and open about it, and having an open communication. Because I think in a startup, there are so many things that could be done, and you need to be able to choose which ones you focus on, because otherwise you're going to break as a person, because you can't do everything at the same time. And
I think that that's
yeah,
a real good point, because a lot of people are afraid to say no to roles or things that they've got to do because they think they've got to take it on. But it's having that cutoff point, isn't it? Like you say, you need to work on the right things and prioritize. And sometimes saying no isn't actually the worst option. It's probably the best option, just so you can get, I suppose, all your other roles done. Is that what you were trying to say there?
yes, exactly. And it is something that I believe that a lot of people struggle with, and I
Yeah.
struggle with times as well. So I have to remind myself that no, this is um, like you need to say no here, or you need to prioritize differently, and nobody will get hurt by it.
No, I think that's the key thing, and nobody will get hurt. With that, then I suppose building on that in your role now, obviously your role is to, I suppose, build the talent function, or I suppose grow the company at Anyfin. So how do you implement a hiring strategy at a business that is so fast growing when you are new? So what tips would you give to people there?
Yeah, so here I'd say make sure that you have a good relationship with the higher up people in the
Yeah.
organization,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, being able to drop into, say, for example, one thing that we have done is that throughout this time we have implemented digitalized testing.
Yeah.
We've changed the order in the way that we are doing our hires. We're also trying to work a lot more with diversity, and I mean, as many tech companies,
Yeah.
it is difficult to find women,
Yeah.
basically, especially in the tech areas. and that is something that is important to us. So a few things that we've done is that we've integrated. So in each recruitment, we'll have at least one man and one woman, and we've also had to look over our ads and how we write them, if we write them in a masculine or feminine way, etc. And being able to get a hold of all managers that are recruiting, then I think it's crucial to have either the CEO, COO, or the CTO kind of giving you the space and time in their meetings to talk about this. And I think that it's important to have a management that understands the importance of it.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's I suppose a huge tip you just put in there. It's just something simple like having both women and men in interview processes. It just creates, I suppose, more welcoming atmosphere and gets everybody involved. And it's such a big issue in technology as a whole, like you say, that I suppose diversity issue. But having that simple change is something that every business can probably fix overnight, I'd say. So it's something that I suppose I hadn't thought about until we originally spoke, which is pretty cool and something that I'll definitely be advising my clients to do. So I'm stealing that from you, Julie. I'm taking it as my own.
Do it.
In all honesty, but I think it's a real cool bit of advice. And on that, I suppose building onto onboarding, I suppose what advice would you give to people in terms of the do's and don'ts? Obviously, I know that, like you say, you're still learning yourself, but what would your, I suppose, do's and don'ts be?
Yeah, so I think that what I've learned and what I really believe in is that, I mean, onboarding starts from the first interaction you have with a person, from the moment when they're applying or when they're actually like visiting our website. And I think it's really important to be clear, to be welcoming, and to really show who we are as a company, and also being honest and straightforward. I mean, it does happen that a candidate might not be what we're looking for at the moment, but they could be interesting in the future. Then tell them that and be really open with that. And I think also now, especially when we are moving people across the world to come to Sweden, I think that it's important to be helping out as much as possible. We, for example, help people to find a place to stay. We help them out with a visa, and we're trying to just make them feel as included as possible. And our office manager, she's doing a lot when it comes to the actual like onboarding when they're here. And her and I have been working really closely for the past year on those parts. And there it's everything from we created an employee handbook where you can read on everything that's going on with us, even though we are constantly changing. So the
it's probably out of date by the time it's published, isn't it?
It's very much like going in and changing it all the time. But like we also make sure that we introduce everyone to the company. So with a picture of the day that they are starting, and they get to introduce themselves a little bit on our Slack channel now that we're in Corona and people can't be there. And she really does a huge job of like making everyone feel welcome and having an introduction with them, explaining everything, how it works. And our managers are also taking a huge part in kind of calling the person before they start, etc.
Yeah, I think those little touches really go a long way with candidates, don't they? That personal interaction, especially if it's from a manager as well, they seem like they're more important that way. So I think little, I suppose, the 1%ers make a huge difference, which is pretty cool. And I think you've touched on there, I suppose, how things change internally on short notice, and the way to manage that is probably just with communication. I think we were joking before, Julia, if we say, I suppose, question from a candidate, what's a normal day without Corona? I don't think we know, do we? I suppose anything have doubled since Corona, so they're a completely different business. They are now than they were even prior to Corona, which is, I suppose, the magic question that you probably can't answer. So I won't put you on the spot with that one. I think a nice way to wrap up, Julie, would be for you to, I suppose, give 3 pieces of advice. I think it's really cool. But if you were to, I suppose, contact yourself now and you were to start all over again, what would your, I suppose, top 3 pieces of advice be if you're in your position?
Yeah, I think that looking back, I would probably say to dare even more.
Okay, I quite like that.
Yeah, and yeah, just dare. If you have an idea, do it. And I think also I've been circling back to this with asking questions, and I think that that is one thing that I did quite well. But then I would probably say to ask for help more.
Okay.
And yeah, making sure to ask for help sooner.
Yeah.
Kind of taking all the knowledge there is to kind of just gather it and sum it up. And I also want to say to, and I guess that this is something that I feel like I've actually been doing well, but that I would just say like continue to do. And that is to be open and honest.
Okay, cool.
In all aspects.
Why do you think that's so important?
I think that that's important because it makes sure that you're on the same page as the people around you.
Yeah.
It makes sure that you don't get too much work, and it makes sure that that you have a good relationship with the people around you. Basically, and that you have a level of trust between you and the people that you're working with, knowing that exactly if something doesn't work, if something doesn't work, you know that they will be honest enough to say it, and you'll be honest enough to also say it to the people when it's not working, and vice versa. Then you can know that you can trust when somebody says that you're doing something well, you can trust that you're actually doing something well.
Hopefully, anyway. Probably still have to double check. But I think from my side, Julie, I've definitely learned a lot today. I think that the key takeaway for me would be, I quite like the fact you said dare even more. Especially if you're in, I suppose, a hyper-growth company, you've got to, I suppose, take those challenges and push the boundaries. So that's something that I'm definitely going to take away. I just want to say I really appreciate you taking the time today on the podcast. I think people are definitely going to take things away from it, and it's going to add value to people looking to do a similar thing to you, or just general, I suppose, recruiters and HRs in FinTech. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no worries. As always, guys that are listening, hopefully you are listening. The podcast can be found on our YouTube channel, on our Impala Insights page, and they'll be on Spotify shortly. We'll be back next week with another guest speaker. But once again, Julia, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
No worries.